Okay, so today we're going to do a couple of subject matters. So the first is going to be covering off how to secure the QNAP, and you can leave it there if you're happy with your QNAP just being as secure as possible. That can be the end of it. If you want to go the next step and you want to be able to have remote access to your files from anywhere in the world through the internet, then we'll cover that off in the second section of this webinar here as well. So everything I'm going to talk about here at the start is just going to be how to lock down your QNAP, how to make sure you're following the best practices to make it as secure as possible. Number one, this would start with just making sure that your NAS is as up to date as possible on firmware updates. If your NAS is connected to the internet, which would happen automatically on a default configuration if you set it up with automatic IP addressing, things like that. It will automatically update itself every time you log into the interface. It does a little check to make sure that you've got the latest firmware version, and we generally do recommend keeping that as up to date as possible to make sure that any vulnerabilities are fixed. So each of the firmware updates, they come with sometimes new features, new applications, new services, but also there'll be some bug fixes or security vulnerabilities that may have been spotted or repaired that have been added into those as well. So it's always good practice to make sure you're as up to date as possible on the firmware version. Another thing I want to point out is every QNAP since the past couple of years does not have a default username and password that we had in the past. So in the past, it has been something like admin as a username with admin as a password. Every single QNAP now has a default password, which is actually the MAC address, which is a 12-digit alphanumeric key that's printed on the NAS somewhere. So there'll be a sticker on the NAS, usually with the serial number, and on that will be the MAC address of your unit. And you can also obtain this MAC address from our QFinder application. So if I was to open up the QFinder application here on my computer, when it goes off and scans the network, it's going to find different units, and you'll see the MAC addresses over here, and this will be the default username or password for each of the NAS that you're connected to. So there's no longer a standard password. As you go through the setup process, it will not let you continue unless you change the password. So one of the first questions it asks when you first set up the NAS, which you'll have seen from our last 4-part series, is it does ask you to set a password to even change it away from what that MAC address number would be. And the password can't be something simple. For example, you can't make it be admin and admin like the old default used to be. It will not let you proceed with admin as the admin password. So the next steps I'm going to go through are installing different applications that can assist with securing the QNAP. You can, of course, do this without having these applications installed, but it makes life a lot easier because it does checks for you every week to make sure that everything is still by the secure policy that you've selected. So the first application I would recommend is our Security Counselor application. This application can be found in the App Center on any QNAP. So if you go down here to the security section at the bottom left, in here you'll see effectively the 3 apps that we can recommend. The McAfee antivirus one is optional. You do have to pay a license to use that one, and we do have a free alternative antivirus built into the NAS, which I'll cover off as well. But the 2 I'm going to recommend would be Malware Remover and Security Counselor. You can not install the Malware Remover if you want, but when you open up Security Counselor, it's going to ask you to enable it to be fully compliant with whichever security policy that you set. So if we open up the Security Counselor application, I've got it set to the most basic level. So I've got the basic security policy set. Here we've got 3 different check sections that it's going through, and you can choose whether or not you want it to be enabled to check these or not. So perhaps you don't want an antivirus running on your NAS, so you can disable the check for antivirus if you want to as well, and Malware Remover. Now, it's not just a case of having these features turned on. They have to be turned on. There has to be a schedule set for each of them to actually do an antivirus scan and to perform updates of the virus definitions. I see we've already got a question here saying, are you able to disable the default admin account? No, you cannot disable the default admin account. You need it for most purposes. And of course, if if you did ever have permission to disable an admin account, that would be the admin account. But if it was disabled, you'd never be able to re-enable it because you've already disabled the admin account. So we would recommend using the admin account sparingly. Just use it for configuration changes. Try not to use the admin account for any access to the NAS. Don't save the password into your computer so that when it autofills forms and things like that, if there was malware, ransomware out there, that's how they gain access to different resources that you have. So I would recommend not using those. So with all these different options that we've got set, we can see that I've got no risks detected with the setup. Now, if we go to look at the security policy that I've got set here, there's quite a lot of sections that have to be agreed upon with the Security Council of these what the settings are as to whether or not it's going to say you're at no risk for that particular policy. So here for the basic security policy, we're making sure that your NAS is using the latest version of firmware. Some services are disabled that may not be used by most users. Can the NAS access the internet? This is so that you can get updates and things like that from the NAS. And then we go down the different options here. Do you have applications installed with valid digital signatures? And if you do have the option to allow apps to be installed that don't have digital signatures, is that option enabled or disabled? So there's a lot of different options here, but this is the most basic security policy that's set. Now, if I was to change this up to the next level, which is the intermediate security policy, as we scroll down the list, there's a few more things that have been added. So different things like SQL passwords, a lot of things that might be a bit confusing. Really don't worry about what they say. If I apply this intermediate policy and click OK, it's going to ask, do I want to run a new security checkup now? So I'm going to say yes. And if we go back to the overview page, we can see that it's now scanning for a new security checkup with the new options. And I can see here that we're at a medium risk, and there's two reports that have been available there. So if I click into view reports, we can see that I've got two options here. That number one, my antivirus does not use the latest definitions. And also my NAS isn't forcing passwords to change at least every 180 days. So to change these are just links that you can click. So if I wanted to go and check the password change facility, I can tick that. So it's going to take me straight to the settings screen for that. So if I make it larger, we'll see that at the bottom. So we can see that this option is disabled. So if I was to tick that box, I've got it set down at 90 days, but it does only want it to be every 180 days. So you could increase this if you wanted to. I'm going to apply that setting change. And because it also mentioned about the antivirus, so I can click on the antivirus option there as well, and it will take me straight to the built-in free antivirus option here. This is called QNAP AV. You can download definition updates directly from them, or you can just click the update button here. So if I click the update now button, it's going to go off and do a check for the latest virus definition updates. So it's going to start downloading those, installing them into the unit. That can take a couple of minutes to happen in the background. But if I go back here and I click scan again, I'm going to let it do another scan to see if I'm still at risk or is everything okay. So it's still not installed those latest virus definitions, so we'll wait for those to install, and I'll click scan again in a moment. But that's basically stopped the other error now. The other error about not having passwords being forced to change every 180 days, I've already got rid of that. Now this scan will generally run once a week, every week. You can change that schedule if you want, so you can set this to a different schedule. But I've generally got it set to just run once a week, and every time it runs, you'll get a little pop-up that comes up here that says it's finished running, and you can go and check the logs. If there's anything that's at a high risk, so you've not met one of the high risk categories, you will actually get an alert here in red, almost like an error on your NAS, that you've got to go and deal with that, to go and either add an exception to that rule, you're happy with that error, or you can change your security policy up and down. So yeah, that's the first thing I would recommend. Now, as part of this, from the overview screen, we can see the malware remover there as well. So with the malware remover, that's a separate application. So if I come over here to the malware remover, this is a little tool that's going to scan everything on your NAS, make sure that you don't have anything that's a recognized malware, and definition updates update daily as well. And this is a scan that runs every day. So you can start the scan and it will go off and do the scan. It only takes a couple of minutes to run, but this is just going to make sure that all the data that's stored in your NAS is not affected by any recognized malware that could harm the QNAP as well. So long as this scan is scheduled to run at least every 24 hours, the security counselor will be happy with that you're taking enough care there. So there we go, scan complete, everything's okay. So if we go back to the Security Counselor application, we can see that that's there. See, we've got a question there from somebody called Alcide. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Can you exclude files by scanning by the virus scanner? Good question. Yes, you can. So in the antivirus application, there is, when you create a scan job, when you edit the scan job, there is an option in here to filter. So you can scan all files, quick files, or you can also tick the box to exclude files or folders, and then you can input the paths of those files or folders there as well. So hopefully that answers that for you, Alcide. Okay. One of the other questions that just came in from Ian there, is there a way to do two-part authentications for logins? Yes, absolutely. And actually, if you were to change the security policy all the way up to the advanced security policy, one of the options, as we scroll right down the list in here, one of the options, if I remember rightly, was to make sure you've got two-factor authentication enabled. I can't remember where that was in the list, but you do have to have two-factor authentication enabled. To enable that. If you do want to enable two-factor authentication, if you click up here to the admin section and go to options, there's an option here for two-step verification where you can enable this, and this works in conjunction with our authenticator app, which would be QManager. So QManager will be needed every time you want to log into the NAS. You can open up the QManager application and it will give you your two-step code so that you can enter. So just having the username and password for the NAS is not enough to log in if you really want to go one extra step, and you would need that for the advanced security policy that's there. Okay. Right, so after you've picked the policy that you're happy with, that's one step. So that's really locked down your NAS into a state that's recommended by the particular policy. You put it in good stead there that there's no risks, there's no way of anybody gaining access to the NAS in a malicious way. Parts of the Security Counselor is to also set up some notifications. So within the QNAP, we do have a notification center, and in the notification center, it does require you to be notified if there is things like new firmware updates and things like that. So I've got here set up email alerts, and I've got a push service set up for anything that's happening with the NAS. And if you go to the different rules that you've got, so if I was to go here to my email rules, we can see that I've got an account set up for my QNAP email address. And if I go and edit the different rules in this, this is working for a lot of different options that we've got within the notification rules. So here, rule 1 for my email, I've actually got a notification to my email for every possible thing to do with my QNAP. So every category, software, hardware, doesn't matter. I've got everything turned on for this. So in my email, I will get an update when I change settings, if anything's wrong, if anybody else changes a setting. So you can get a lot of different alerts here. Now for the push notifications, I've gone a little less on the notifications. So if I was to open this up and scroll down, I've only got the notifications in here turned on for the firmware updates. So scroll up, sorry. So here, when there's a firmware update available, and also when a firmware update is applying. So I've got those to enable as push notifications. So you can enable these, but the notification center is very important because you know pretty much in real time, as soon as something's happened on the NAS or if something's changing. If it's not expected, you can log in and deal with it. If it is something that's expected, you can just delete the email. Okay. So that's really covered off everything that's securing your QNAP. There are a few other areas that you can go. So in the control panel, we do have a whole security section, and this is where you would do everything if you didn't want to use the Security Counselor software. If you wanted to do it yourself without having the Security Counselor prompt you to do any changes, you can set most of the settings up directly in this settings screen, just in the control panel. So first of all, you've got an allow and deny list. So the default here is to allow all connections from anywhere. If you wanted to just allow connections from your local LAN, so that even if you did accidentally have a failure at the firewall, or somebody opened up some ports on the firewall that let users come in, you can set this so that it only allows connections from the list. So you can set that, and you can add a specific address, a specific subnet, an IP range. The IP range could be just your local LAN. So that even if it was open to the outside world, users would not be able to contact your QNAP because they're not coming from a network or an IP address that you've added to recognize. Be very careful when setting this. If you set the wrong settings up here, you might not be able to gain access to the QNAP, and you might have to push the reset button on the back if you wanted to get around that. Okay, I've seen some questions here from Tim. Can the push notifications go to multiple devices? Yes, they can. You can have as many users connected as you want with the Queue Manager application and set them up so that they can have push notifications going to them as well. And somebody else here is Herman is asking, coming back to the disabling of the admin account, sure you can, as long as you have at least one custom user that has admin rights. I would generally still just recommend to have one user with admin rights, which is the admin user, and just don't save the password anywhere else. But yes, if you wanted to go the other route of having a user with admin rights, that could be possible, but now you've got two users that can affect the NAS in a big way. I would say having just the default admin account that's a bit more secure with a very strong password would probably be just as secure. And a question here from Robert, would be interested how to see you set up notification center to tell me when somebody logs into or attempts to log into MyQNAP. So one of the big ways to do this is in the system logs on the QNAP, there is a section in here. Let me just open this up. Have a quick look at this one, if I can find where that setting is. There is an option to enable logging of different connections that are happening to the QNAP. So over here, you've got a system access log. So in here is when people would be trying to connect in and out of the QNAP. You've got different online users, system events, things like that. This is looking on QTS Hero. So this might look a little different from the NAS that you guys have out there. So if I was to log into a different NAS that I have here and go to QTS, so just to illustrate the difference. So let me just take this, admin. So on this one, you've got to actually enable it on QTS as an operating system. So here, if I go to Control Panel, open this out and go to System Logs, there is an option here that by default is disabled. So System Connection Logs, you can see on my NAS here, it's set to start logging, which means it's not running. So if I was to tick this box, it says, do you want to start logging? I'm going to say yes. So now it's actually logging anything that's happening. So if somebody was to connect into my NAS or anything like this, these would all be now logged, but these are now all going to be events that are recorded that you can now select to be notified from in the notification center as well. That might get a bit tedious because if people are starting to do lots of logging onto your QNAP throughout the day, if you've got several users, you are going to be bombarded with notifications. So sometimes it's just better to have it logging here. And if you do need to check if somebody's logged in, especially in a busy environment, you can just come to this area and have a look at it. Okay, so that's how you do it in QTS. So QLog Center, this is brand new for QTS Hero that we're using here as well. Okay. Just before we move on to the next section of enabling the remote access, I'll just have a look at some of the other questions here. So somebody's saying, what is the advantage of using a McAfee if you compare it with the standard virus scanner? I guess that's probably more of a question for the McAfee guys. They would probably say that they're more up to date. They cover more of the different definitions. I definitely know that the virus definition file for McAfee is much larger than the free one from ClamAV, so it does cover a lot more bases. But yeah, McAfee, they're a bit possibly quicker to respond to virus threats than perhaps ClamAV. So if there's a new virus that's come out, they would perhaps get the definition update updated before ClamAV. I'm not saying that's happening 100% of the time, but that's probably what McAfee would say. As I say, maybe a better question to go talk to McAfee to ask them why McAfee is better than ClamAV. And a question here from Dirk saying, are there any Mac OS issues you're aware of that would limit more than one user account to access the QNAP? No, absolutely not. The NAS really doesn't matter. It doesn't care if it's a Windows user, Linux user, Mac user. It makes no difference what the user is. There is no limit to how many times a user can log in by default. Of course, you can go through the security settings and set this up to be a lot more restricted if you want to. So within the security setting, when you come over here to things like password policy, you can go through here and you can set a lot of different things for the password strength. You want at least one uppercase and lowercase. You can't use the same password twice. How many times things are used? You cannot use more than one character repeatedly within the same password. So there's a lot of different settings that you can set here within the NAS itself. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about accessing your NAS remotely. So everything for accessing the NAS remotely really starts within our MyQNAP Cloud application for a lot of people, especially if your internet connection where your QNAP is connected to has an IP address that changes dynamically. So, you're not going to have a static IP address where it's the same all the time at a guaranteed time. So with this feature here, you will have a get started option at the top that lets you through a wizard, which effectively you just have to sign into your QNAP ID account, and you have to pick a MyQNAP Cloud device name for your device. I picked here secureqnapuk.myqnapcloud.com. So with this setup, I've now got a domain name that I can access this QNAP, and that's what I've been accessing the QNAP from here at the top. And this is what I'm using to gain remote access to the QNAP, even if the IP address changes. We've got a lot of different options here. Now, in the interest of keeping things secure, we do have a few features here that do make it easy to access your QNAP remotely, but aren't necessarily the most secure option to pick from. The first being auto router configuration. You may also have heard this to be a feature called UPnP, or Universal Plug and Play. What this will allow devices on your network to do, if your router supports UPnP, the device can ask the router to open up ports to the correct LAN IP address of the device behind the firewall, in this case the NAS. It will open up that port through to the NAS so that you can access the specific service that you want to gain access to. There's a lot of services you can run on a QNAP, so enabling this UPnP option will by default open up nearly 15 ports to the QNAP for all the services that you've got enabled. If you do have this enabled, down the bottom here, there will be a big table that appears that shows you which ports we've requested from the router to open up and whether the router was able to open them or not. The router will respond to us and say, yes, I've opened those ports. If you don't want all these separate ports opening, which I typically don't, I actually never enable the UPnP port forwarding service, and I've even actually got it disabled on my router as well, so that even if I accidentally forgot to turn this feature off, it would never come up as being able to open up a port. Everything I do has to open up ports manually. The next section is the dynamic DNS. So this is the host that I've created, the secureqnapuk.myqnapcloud.com. It gives you the actual IP address it's referenced to, and when the IP was last checked and confirmed and when it was updated. So you can manually configure the dynamic DNS IP address here. So if it's not been auto-detected correctly, you can force in a different IP address as well. The next section I'd probably go down to is the SSL certificate. So SSL is the secure socket layer. So this would be a bit like your online banking. Whenever you go to your online banking, logging into your webmail, anything where you generally have to log in with a username or password, you're going to see this little padlock appearing up here at the top of the interface. Now, if I click that, it's going to show me the certificate and confirm that I've got a certificate for this MyQNAP Cloud host name, and it should be at the IP address that certificate is running on. So this is letting me know that I've got a secure certificate and I have reached the address that I think I was supposed to reach. Now, if I was to access this same QNAP through a different link, so I've got another host pointing to this. So if I was to go to QNAPuk.QNAP.com, go to port 50, because that's what I'm accessing this QNAP on, do HTTPS at the start and click enter, I'm getting an error now that this connection is not private. So it's not going to give me the nice password logo that I'm connecting to. So I can come down here, I can let's have a look. I can bypass this, so it wants me to type in the password. So I can access this same QNAP. So just to illustrate, this is the same QNAP, but just with a different host here. I'm going to log into it just to illustrate that the password's going to be different. So if I go into the MyQNAP Cloud option here, we can see that this is the secure QNAP UK. It's just I'm now accessing it via a different host, but I don't have a valid certificate for that one. So I got lots of errors. It wasn't trusted as a location. I forced a trust, which isn't exactly what you want to do. It's sort of bypassing the security of it a little bit. So you can get these SSL certificates, and we do offer free ones via the Let's Encrypt service. You get two choices when you're doing it. If you want to use a host name other than secureqnapuk.myqnapcloud.com, so you want to use your own domain on the end there is a way to do that as well. So here in these security settings, there is a certificate option at the top. So certificate and private key, you can replace the certificate with your own paid one. So if you wanted to add a certificate into there that is not from Let's Encrypt or for a specific domain that you want to use to access the QNAP, you can upload it here without doing that through the MyQNAP Cloud portal. The MyQNAP Cloud portal only covers MyQNAP Cloud domains and connection options that we've got there. So the next thing I'm going to show you is accessing the NAS via something like a VPN service. So the benefits of a VPN is it's an encrypted connection. You only need to open up 1, 2, or 3 ports, depending on the VPN service that you've done, to your entire NAS to gain access to every service running on the NAS. So different things on the NAS like web servers, FTP servers, different applications that we may have like Plex or anything else that you may be running, they all require their own port to access. So if you wanted to use it without a VPN, you may open several ports to gain access to it. With VPN, you can restrict it. So with some of the service, for example, our own QBelt VPN service that we've got, it only needs a single port to be open. So if you were to enable this, the default is 443. You can change that port to anything that you want. But the benefit here is that you only have to forward a specific port. So if I was to change that to say port 52, if I wanted to gain access to the entirety of my NAS, I could forward just this single UDP port through port 52 to my NAS local IP address from my firewall, and that's going to give me all the access I need to absolutely every service on that QNAP. So if I was to go here and go check what the IP address is, so if I go to my network and virtual switch, I can see that my IP address is 192.168.50.29. So if I go across to my firewall settings here, so if I go into the settings, I'll just point out that in my services here, UPnP on mine is off so that I'm not using the automatic router configuration features. But if I go into my firewall, this will look different depending on everybody's firewall, and everyone's different, so I can't give you a universal way of doing it, but usually they will call the feature port forwarding. So if I use port forwarding here, I've got an option here to create a new port forward rule. So I would open it up and I would call this QBelt maybe. So I'm going to call this as a QBelt port forward that I'm doing. I'm going to allow this port forward from anywhere because I don't know where I'm going to VPN from. I can restrict it to a specific IP range. Let's say I wanted to connect to this NAS at my home from our office that we have in Swindon. I could limit this to just working from that IP address if I wanted to as well. So the port I'm going to select 52. So just to illustrate that, I'm just matching whatever I've set here in the QVPN option. So when I come back to the managing here, it wants to know which IP address I'm forwarding it to. So I'm now going to match the IP address that I have set on the NAS LAN port. So that was 192.168.50.29. And the forward port, this will normally be identical to the port that you've got at the top. So you can type in 52. Now I can forward both protocols, TCP and UDP, but I know for this one, I just needed UDP because that's what the NAS is asking for here. So we've tried to give you as much information as you need for the different options that you've got there. I see here a question from John saying, does QBelt allow access to the LAN or just the NAS? So the default setting will be just into the NAS, but if you want to give access to the whole LAN, you can do that using some different tools we've got in our networking and virtual switch feature. So you can come into the networking and virtual switch and you can go to the advanced options in here. So within the network and virtual switch, you've got a virtual switch section here, and there is a wizard that you can launch that will allow you to add a virtual switch for different tasks. So you can create a software-defined switch that allows users to come in on one interface, such as the one the VPN's running on, and gain access to the rest of the network that way. There are also containers and virtual machine routing options that we have that can also do that for you in our virtualization station or container station applications if you want to use those as well. So there are ways to do that, but I won't cover those in this session. That might be a suggestion for a video in another session of how to use software-defined switches and virtual switches on the NAS itself. So yeah, if I was to go back here and click apply, I won't click save because it's probably going to disconnect my internet whilst it reboots the router to apply that change, which will disconnect the webinar. But that's how you would set up a lot of the different port forwarding rules in a lot of routers. You're usually looking for a section that's called port forwarding or network address translation. So both of those would give you access to doing port forwards through the firewall. Some of them may have pre-built services. So if you were using one that wasn't called QBelt from QNAP. Maybe you wanted to use one of the more standard options out there like PPTP or L2TP IPsec. That might already be a service dropdown where it already has the ports filled out for you. So yeah, there's a question here. Let's have a look. I think I already answered that one. Yeah. Okay, so that's how you would gain access via port forwarding in through the firewall that you've got there. So hopefully I've answered most questions there. The remote access side of things, again, is just totally optional. By default, the NAS will not allow remote access through to your QNAP. The UPnP features that open up ports automatically on the firewall is completely optional and not enabled by default. I just wanted to stress that. One final option that I will discuss is we do have an extra feature which is called MyQNAPCloudLink. This is a way to gain access to your QNAP if you cannot open ports through your firewall. So in some circumstances, such as a managed service office, perhaps your internet is delivered through the 4G network from a mobile phone, cell phone company. If that's the way the internet comes into your home, quite often you don't get options on your router to open up ports into your network. So if you still want access to some of the services on your NAS, you can install the MyQNAPCloudLink application. Now this will do an outbound connection from the QNAP to our portal server, and you would access the portal server directly. So instead of accessing directly to the host name that you create, like secure QNAPUK.myQNAPcloud.com or whatever you create, you would actually go to our www.myqnapcloud.com address. You would log in here with your QNAP ID, and once you've logged in, you will then be able to access some of the services on your QNAP, and that includes things like the files on your QNAP if you've allowed it to. You can enable and disable the services that you want to give access to through this portal. So that's a way that you can still gain access to some of the functions of your QNAP, even if you cannot open ports on the firewall there as well. Somebody here is asking, so Jerome is asking, why do you discourage using UPnP? So the main reason is you have lots of devices on your network, such as computers running Skype, NAS devices, printers with internet printing services. UPnP is effectively a golden ticket to any device on your network to open up ports on your firewall to let the wider internet traffic into your personal network. Now, it's normally just 1 or 2 ports, and it should be directly to a specific device. So it doesn't sound that bad, but if there's something malicious on the network that was connected, it's going to be able to have full control over any port on the router without you knowing about it. So that's why I personally don't use UPnP. I would rather be in control of and knowing which ports that open up. Now, it would be a lot easier. A lot of services do work better. For example, if you have an Xbox, Xbox will often give you a warning when it's connecting to Xbox Live if it does not sense that you have UPnP on your firewall. So some things like online gaming, video chats, some of these sort of Amazon Echo devices that might want to do video calls across the internet. I think Facebook made a device recently. All of these will need ports opening at one of the ends. So they're looking for UPnP to do this. But this is ports being allowed through your firewall, effectively turning off your firewall for these specific functions to gain access in or out of your network. So that's why I would recommend not using it. Of course, you can use it. It does make setup much simpler. Simply turning on a feature on your QNAP, the MyQNAP Cloud feature will go, oh, I see that you've now enabled the web server feature to host a website. It will automatically open up the port on your firewall at the same time that you enable the service. It's not a 2-step process for you to have to go do that yourself. It's very easy to do. I see here from John, you have a pre-shared key of QNAP. How critical is it that it should be a complex password? I generally would say that the pre-shared key isn't too important to be a complex password. That's effectively where the encryption is planned from doing the pre-shared key. That's sort of the strength of the encryption. So the more it's done, the harder it is to protect. But each account off the VPN, so just for those users that don't know what that means, if I go back to the VPN application, So if I come down to one of the options here, PSK or pre-shared key. So if you were to turn this on, it wants a pre-shared key, so an option to type in. You could leave it as the default QNAP, or you can type it in as something else a bit more complex. This isn't the only way to gain access. After this, you still have to have a username and password to access the NAS as well. So I'd say it's not hugely important, but yes, if you can set that more complex, it's just going to make it that much harder for anyone to intercept any traffic. Somebody else here, so Ari is asking, is Counselor available for older QNAP TS239 Pros? I don't believe it would go that far back. I think you need to be able to run at least QTS 4.4.2 to be able to install Security Counselor. So as long as you can install QTS 4.4.2, you can install that. So Mike's asking, MyQNAPCloudLink, is this access not related to a user, possibly one that has restrictions? Yes, so access is by user as well. So number one, you have to allow your QNAP to have access to MyQNAPCloudLink. Number two, you then have to allow the users to access those services on top of that. So just enabling the MyQNAPCloudLink doesn't give anybody any access except the admin user, but you can enable and disable user access via that service as well. Robert's asking if there will be a recording available. Yes, there will be. It will be on the YouTube channel, I believe, either later today or by Monday anyway. Question from Daniel. Can I get files on my NAS via Windows Explorer to be able to send them via WeTransfer if I'm not in the same subnet? If you want to gain access to files on your QNAP via Windows Explorer remotely, yes, absolutely possible. It's a service you have to turn on that you may not have heard of. Let me go find it here. Go down to web server. So inside the web server setting, we have a WebDAV option. So WebDAV is effectively a way to have mounted folder access into things like Windows and Mac directly through the firewall. Now, when you enable WebDAV, it's just going to use your shared folder permissions, so the same permissions you've got set up for users if they were in your same network. But with this option, you can also set a dedicated port. But again, if you want to keep it secure, turn off the non-secure option, so only use HTTPS. Here we've got a port for 5001, so you would have to do that to enable 5001 through the firewall. Now on a Mac, which is what I'm using now, if I wanted to gain access to this in my Finder, for example, which is a bit like Windows Explorer, I would go up here to go connect to server, and it's given me the path down here that I need. So in this case, I would need to connect to a different link. So if I do HTTPS and I would do secure QNAP UK MyQNAPCloud.com. I would do the port number that's set down here. So here it's saying : port. I look at the port that's there, so I would type 5001, and then it wants the folder path. So there's a default folder on the QNAP called public. So if I was to use that as an example, I would type public. Now, when I click connect, it's going to ask me for authentication details. This isn't going to work because I have not forwarded port 5001, so I won't click connect, but that's how it would work. I believe I may have one still running here on a cloud NAS I've got running, so I'll try connecting that one to show you what that would look like. I'm not sure if I left this service running or enabled or not, so this still may fail. Oh no, there we go. So this is connecting to a QTS Cloud NAS that we've got hosted up on Amazon's AWS service. So this is a access into a NAS, so I've got access to it. It works just like any other folder inside my computer. The obvious downside is it's now limited by my internet speed, so it's not going to be as fast as accessing the local NAS. But that would be the same process for connecting with Windows Explorer. It's just instead of going go connect to server, it's a bit like mapping a network drive. You have to mount the WebDAV path, that's all. If you just have a quick Google online of how to connect to a WebDAV path in Windows 10, it should show you how to do that. Okay, a question here from Dirk. He says, in iOS, when away from home, I always connect through MyQNAPCloud.com. Would you advise me to change to VPN access as demonstrated? It's entirely up to you there, Dirk. It's one way is just the same as the other. VPN access is just a bit more encrypted. So that's the option that I would recommend using instead. And it also takes something out the loop. You don't have to go to the portal of MyQNAPCloud to then come to your NAS. If you use the domain name that you created, like secure QNAP QNAP.MyQNAPCloud.com, you're just coming straight to us directly. We've just done a DNS redirect for you there. Okay. So your question from Alcide here. I have an older model TS469 Pro, but it still does a great job. That was actually my first NAS joining QNAP, great NAS. I played around a bit with the network settings, but I'm now unable to set the DNS server on auto. Can it be done with SSH or Telnet? I'll send you a little guide after the session there on that one, Alcide, on how to do that. It may be that you've added your network adapter into a virtual switch, and that's where the DNS settings now are, but I'll come back to you after the session. So there's another question here from Mike. Windows NFS Security Counselor states I should only set up local addresses. Am I right? Yes, for NFS, if you set it to especially the higher security policy options, that's one of the options that it wants if you're using NFS. But again, you can add exceptions and just be okay with not setting that option if you want to. But that's just a recommendation that we're giving you, that NFS should only be really accessed by local addresses. If you want remote access into an NFS share, you could just use something like WebDAV instead. Question there from Jerome, just asking how to bind ports with Unify equipment. Well, just because I'm running it, I can quickly show you how that works. So primarily what you do is you go to your device list. So you go pick a switch, so whichever switch that you want. So within here, you go to the port section, and then you highlight whichever port you want to do. When you edit it, there is a profile section that you can come in here, and you can go manage profiles, and there is a profile override option that you've got to do for aggregation. I'm just making sure I'm getting to the right section here. Let's have a look. Keep existing. Where was that setting gone? Unify does have its absolute own way of setting up things like profiles. Maybe it has to be on a port with something connected. 1 second. Yeah, so here we go, profile override. So there's an aggregate option. So we call it port trunking. They call it aggregate. Some switches call it link aggregation. So here you would go, I want to aggregate the ports. It asks you which port range you want to aggregate. So you've got ports 7 to 8, for example, and then you have to go match that on the other switch or device that you're connecting to, and then you apply that down at the bottom. But yes, within it, you click on the port that you want to start the aggregation with, just one of the ports you've got connected, and then you can set the range within it. It's not very obvious. I agree with you. I understand why you've asked that question. Question from John: is there a simple way to find my IP addresses so I can manually update QBelt? So if your IP address changes on the internet side of things, using MyQNAP Cloud, it automatically checks your internet IP address every couple of minutes. If there's a change, it updates the host to match that IP address. It's a very short lease time on the DNS, so it will update pretty quick. So the maximum time you may not be able to connect to your NAS, maybe about 5 minutes, depending how quick the DNS updates. But yeah, it's automatic within it. So I think John added to that question saying it was about QBelt for the iPhone. So yes, so when you set up QBelt on the iPhone, if you set the IP address or host name as your MyQNAP Cloud address, even if your home or your NAS location's IP address changes, it will always be updated with that host so that you never have to change the host. So in my case here, I'm using secure QNAPUK.MyQNAPCloud.com. So long as you keep it set to secure.myqnapcloud.com, even if your IP address changes on your internet connection, that host will always point to your home IP address. It might just be a different IP address every 24 hours, but it's always going to be the same name. Okay, I think we're going to end it there. I think that's the end of the questions. So if anybody's asked any questions we've not got back to, or if I've said I'm going to get back to you, I'm going to summarize these questions after the session. Any open outstanding items, if somebody wants a guide sending out anything like that, we can do that after the session for you. So thanks a lot for attending. The next session's in a couple of weeks to go through how many things your QNAP can do. So that's effectively me looking at one of our NAS and basically turning on every service and setting I can in a single QNAP, just to sort of illustrate how many different things your QNAP can do. Obviously, one of those things is sharing your files across the network, but we're just going to illustrate just how many other things you can use a QNAP for, from anything from websites to CCTV to home media services. We're just going to turn on every feature, so that should be quite a cool one as well. Okay, thanks a lot. I think we'll end it there.